Hi everyone, and welcome to The Sleepy Scientist. I'm really happy you're here. Tonight, we're going to go on a calm and quiet trip to learn something amazing. So get comfy, take a deep breath, and let's enjoy this peaceful science story together. Before we start, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it for you right now? If you like relaxing science videos, don't forget to tap the like button. Now let's begin. Imagine a planet not so different from the one we know now, yet older, raw, and aching with change. The sky above is streaked with clouds of dust that will not settle. Beneath this sky, forests have turned to ash, rivers run thick with debris, and the winds howl with a kind of hollow memory. This is Earth, just after the meteor struck. Not a single voice speaks anymore, not even the chirp of a bird or the buzz of an insect. The world has gone quiet in a way it never has before, a heavy silence that presses into the rocks and the bones buried beneath them. It wasn't just any meteor, it was a world-ending stone from space, roaring through the atmosphere with a heat so fierce it ignited the sky. When it struck somewhere in what we now call the Yucatan Peninsula, it unleashed a force greater than all the bombs humankind would one day build. Trees vaporized, oceans heaved, flames raced across the land. In moments, the world that had been filled with dinosaurs, flowering plants, ancient birds, began to unravel. The impact sent mountains of dust and soot into the sky, blocking out the sun. The warmth of the planet fled, and darkness fell like a blanket of forever night. This darkness did not last for hours or days, it stayed for months, perhaps years. Photosynthesis stopped, plants withered. Without plants, the animals who depended on them starved, and so did the ones who fed on those. In that cascade of collapse, nearly 3/4 of life on Earth vanished. The great dinosaurs, once rulers of continents, slipped into silence, leaving only their bones behind. What remained were pockets of life clinging to warmth in the shadows, small mammals, deep-sea creatures, burrowers and survivors. But in this great loss, something else began to stir, not in the thunder of footsteps, but in the hush of survival. Extinction cleared the stage. It reset the balance. All the old patterns of dominance and competition were swept away. The ecosystems that had stretched across the globe like a grand living web were severed, their threads curling back into the void. In the silence after the meteor, evolution had space to breathe. Life had a moment to rest, and in that rest, new forms began to stir, small, quiet, and unnoticed. The mammals that once lived in the shadows of dinosaurs began to explore. With the giants gone, light filtered into places once held in darkness. Seeds that had waited in the soil began to sprout in open spaces. Flowers spread again, slowly at first, then with a kind of wild momentum. Insects adapted to new blooms. Birds, descended from the smallest of feathered dinosaurs, began to experiment with flight in broader skies. This was not just recovery, it was reinvention. Life didn't return to what it was. It became something entirely new. Scientists have traced this moment, called the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event, and found not only endings, but beginnings. The mammals that would one day become primates and eventually humans owe their existence to this quiet aftermath. Without the fall of the dinosaurs, mammals might have remained forever small, clinging to corners. The silence after the meteor wasn't just a void, it was a cradle, a dark, cold womb where the next chapter of life began to form. In the deep oceans, other survivors stirred. Creatures that needed no sunlight, living off the heat of the Earth itself, continued on. Tube worms, bacteria, deep-sea fish. They thrived in places untouched by the sky. And from these hidden places, new adaptations began. Every extinction, in its strange way, reshapes the map of possibility. Traits once unimportant become essential. Old ways die and new strategies evolve. Life, it seems, is not destroyed by change. It is redefined by it. This moment in Earth's history reminds us that destruction is never just the end. The silence that followed the meteor was also an invitation for life to explore paths it never could before. It was as if nature had paused, looked at its tangled creation, and quietly erased the canvas so it could begin again with a different brushstroke. And while the loss was vast, it made room for the unfamiliar. The creatures that emerged in the wake of disaster did not mourn the past. They simply filled the space left behind, step by gentle step. You can almost hear that silence if you close your eyes, a world stilled not by peace but by possibility, a hush that echoes through time all the way to now, where every living thing carries some echo of that meteor's fire. Even we, in our bones, in the way we walk upright, in the way our hearts beat warm beneath our ribs, are children of that extinction, not despite it, but because of it. Let's drift deeper into the world left behind, into the quiet corridors of time, where life was forced to invent itself all over again. The silence after the meteor wasn't just a pause, it became a forge, and inside that forge, heatless and still, evolution whispered its next instructions to the survivors. In the absence of giants, the small ones had a chance to speak, not with voices, but with their shapes, behaviours and futures. Mice-like mammals crept from their burrows, blinking into the dim light of a reshaped world. They sniffed unfamiliar air, tiptoeing over ash-covered ground, unaware that their tiny hearts carried the promise of every elephant, whale and human that would ever be born. The earth had changed, but it hadn't died. The clouds of dust slowly began to thin. Light, cautious and pale, returned to the surface. With that light, warmth followed, and with warmth, photosynthesis stirred back to life. The first green shoots pierced the grey soil like quiet prayers. Mosses came first, then grasses, then forests, not the same as before, but altered, richer, more varied. The species that emerged from this rebuilding were not copies of the past. They were experiments, each one a new answer to the riddle of survival. The loss of one tree species made space for 10 others to try. Insects too found their moment. Without towering herbivores consuming entire groves, flowering plants spread rapidly, attracting pollinators to their colour and scent. Butterflies danced where none had flown before. Bees built their hives near fresh meadows. Evolution, freed from the weight of the past, became playful. In the place where extinction had burned everything to charcoal, creativity took root. Life began layering itself again, but this time it was different. More networks formed between species. Symbiosis deepened. The rules of living became more cooperative, more responsive to delicate balances, and those balances would carry forward for millions of years. Now imagine the oceans, the vast, trembling blue that had once hidden creatures larger than school buses and stranger than myths. After the extinction, their giants, the marine reptiles, the ammonites, the plankton that supported them, vanished. The food chains collapsed. And yet, in the silence of the depths, plankton found new shapes. Fish evolved new methods of swimming, sensing and hiding. Whales had not yet come, but their ancient cousins stirred in the shadows. The oceans forgot the old rhythms, but they didn't forget how to beat. They learned new tempos, and over time those rhythms created entirely new ecosystems. Every time life has faced extinction, and it has more than 5 times in Earth's long memory, something strange happens. The boundaries between what was possible and what was not begin to blur. Life stops imitating itself and starts inventing. Eyes appear in creatures that never had them. Limbs split and crawl, feathers become tools for display, not just flight. Brains grow, often in silence, without fanfare. In this quiet space between what has ended and what has yet to begin, evolution thrives. It builds without blueprints. It listens to what remains and reshapes the story from there. This reshaping isn't fast. It takes thousands, sometimes millions of years. It begins so slowly that the world barely notices. But one day a creature looks up from the forest floor and sees the sky not just as shelter, but as something it might reach. Another burrows deeper, learning to store food, to remember, to dream. And in time, these little acts of survival become innovation. One species becomes 2. 2 become 10. The diversity grows like ripples from a single drop, and all of it traces back to the silence left by an end. Even today, many of our ecosystems carry the fingerprints of past extinctions. The birds that wake us in the morning, the flowers that bloom in our gardens, even the shape of our own hands. All of it was made possible not by unbroken life, but by breaks. Every fracture in Earth's history has opened a doorway. Some species fell through it, others walked forward. We are not just descendants of survivors, we are the result of reinvention. Our very presence on this planet is a monument to how extinction, however brutal, makes space for transformation. Consider the mammals again, once so small and forgettable. With the dinosaurs gone, they filled every role the world needed. Some stayed tiny, darting through the grass. Others grew larger, learning to run. Some returned to the water, shaping themselves into what would one day become dolphins and whales. Others climbed, swung, and began to see in colour. They learned, remembered, and began to form communities. And eventually they began to wonder. Thought itself, curiosity, empathy, all of these were born in the long shadow of extinction. They were not the echoes of what came before. They were new songs sung into the silence left behind. You can almost feel the weight of that silence now, not a void, but a space filled with waiting, a hush that allows something fragile to grow. That space gave us everything, from the first spark of intelligence to the bloom of culture, from the language of dolphins to the wings of hummingbirds. None of it could have happened if the world had never ended. And so, extinction is not the opposite of life. It is part of life's rhythm, a painful, necessary chord in a much longer song, one that continues even now, beating in the heart of every living thing. Now let us wander toward the quiet resolution of this ancient story, the hush that follows not just loss but renewal. The earth, once cloaked in ash and grief, began to glow again, gently from within. It wasn't sudden. There was no trumpet announcing the return of life. Instead, it came like dawn after a storm, soft light spilling through cracked branches, warm wind returning to the empty hills. The world exhaled. It had survived. And in that survival, life had rewritten itself in a new language, full of softness and strength. Time stretched forward, millions of years flowing like a slow river, carving valleys where forests once burned. The descendants of survivors grew bolder. They stepped farther from shelter. They climbed higher, dug deeper, stretched their limbs and their minds. In them, the memory of extinction lived quietly, not as fear, but as a lesson. Every breath was borrowed from those who didn't make it. Every heartbeat a quiet thanks for the space they left behind. The forests returned more diverse than before. The oceans filled again, their songs richer. And above it all, the sky opened its arms to new flyers, birds, bats, insects, each one echoing a past that ended so others could begin. Life, it seems, does not hold grudges. It doesn't mourn in the way we do. It adapts. It accepts the silence and fills it with colour, shape, sound. Even now, every coral reef, every patch of moss, every leaf fluttering in the wind is a page in a book that began anew after that ancient impact. The mammals that had hidden underfoot became rulers of land and sea. From their line came primates, and from primates, us. We, who now look back through time with tools of science and wonder. We, who tell stories and remember. But even as we understand this great cycle, extinction and rebirth, we find ourselves standing at the edge of a familiar silence once more. Not from meteors or volcanoes this time, but from ourselves. The forests burn again, the oceans warm, species vanish. And yet, within this danger, the lesson still holds. Extinction clears, but it also opens. It ends, but it also begins. The question now is what we will make of the silence we are creating. Will we allow new life to grow from it? Or will we close the door before it can? There is a humility in knowing we are part of this long rhythm. We are not above extinction. We are born from it. Every flower that blooms in a sidewalk crack, every bird that sings despite the noise, every child that looks up and wonders why the stars shine, they are proof that life wants to continue, that it can start again, that even after the deepest silence a voice will rise, maybe a soft cry in the night, maybe a seed cracking open, maybe a new thought in a quiet room. These are the beginnings that matter. So when we ask why extinction makes life possible, we are really asking what it means to begin again, to lose and not be lost, to be broken and still build. Life doesn't resist extinction, it dances with it, it uses it, it waits for the quiet, then steps forward with something unexpected. A fern unfurling in scorched soil, a fish that glows in deep water, a mammal curled with its young in the dark, dreaming of stars. We are not here because nothing ever ended. We are here because so much did. And in the end, the silence after the meteor is not just history, it is a mirror. It shows us that survival is not the same as stillness. That change, even terrible change, can open paths that never existed before. That the end of one song makes room for another. So let the story settle now, not in sorrow but in awe. Let the silence speak not of death, but of space. Let us remember that life is always listening, always watching, always ready to begin again, even in the quiet. Long before flowers bloomed and grasses swayed, before bees buzzed or birds sang in the morning light, there was green, and that green belonged to ferns. They were the quiet conquerors of Earth, spreading their feathery fronds across continents like a soft invasion. In a world that had just begun to recover from extinction's silence, they were among the first to return. Where ash still hung in the air and the soil was stripped bare, ferns found opportunity. They rose from the ruins with no need for seeds or bright petals. They unfurled from the earth like memories waking up. Ferns are old, older than flowers, older than dinosaurs. They first emerged more than 360 million years ago, when the world was still trying to understand what land could hold. Back then, the continents were different. Swamps stretched endlessly beneath skies heavy with moisture. Trees were tall but simple, and animals had only just begun to step out of the water. In this damp and shadowed world, ferns thrived. Their method was not noise or speed, it was patience. With spores instead of seeds, they could float on air, ride the wind, settle in the tiniest cracks of stone. Where others needed light, ferns made do with shade. Where others waited for perfect conditions, ferns simply tried, again and again. When the great extinction wiped out so much of life, the forests of flowering plants withered. The balance of power reset, and once again the ferns returned. They are known as disaster flora, the first green to rise after catastrophe. When volcanoes erupted or meteors struck, ferns were there in the ashes, quietly reclaiming the ground. Their spores spread faster than seeds, and their needs were minimal. They didn't compete, they simply occupied, and slowly, steadily they covered the earth. After the meteor that ended the dinosaurs, fern spores filled the fossil record like a signature in smoke. Paleobotanists call this the fern spike, a sudden explosion of fern remains in ancient soil layers. It is one of the clearest signs that the earth was healing. The dinosaurs were gone, but something green had returned to take their place, not in size or power, but in persistence. These plants didn't roar. They didn't dominate with force, they spread with softness, a silent green tide. In ancient forests, after fires or floods, you'll still see ferns rise before anything else. They whisper their way across fallen logs and up the sides of cliffs. They fill the air with a kind of quiet resilience, reminding us that survival isn't always about strength. Sometimes it's about patience, about waiting for light to return, about knowing how to grow in darkness. And what strange and beautiful ways they grow. Ferns don't flower. They don't produce fruit. Instead, they form fiddleheads, tight curls that slowly unfurl into delicate fronds. These curls are more than just shapes. They are time made visible. Each spiral is a story unfolding slowly, deliberately, no rush, no race, just growth in its most ancient rhythm. They also reproduce without ever needing to meet. One part of the fern releases sperm, the other eggs, and with a touch of water, life begins again. There is no courtship, no ceremony, only rain, soil, and sunlight. Their entire life cycle can happen on a damp stone, in the crook of a branch, or at the base of a broken tree. Ferns ask for little and give much. Shelter to insects, humidity to moss, soil to saplings. They are builders, quietly laying the groundwork for others to thrive. And they do it not just in forests. Ferns grow in deserts, on rooftops, in deep caves. Their spores can drift across oceans, survive in volcanic ash, and endure in places no flower would dare try. In the wake of every extinction, they return, not to dominate, but to begin. Ferns do not chase glory, they prepare the ground for it. So when we talk about how the ferns took over the world, we're not talking about conquest in the usual sense. We're talking about a green persistence that outlasts even the fiercest fires. We're talking about plants that remember the ancient world and still choose to grow in ours. They are living reminders that sometimes the gentlest life can be the most enduring. That softness, spread over time, can shape the world more deeply than violence ever could. Let's sink deeper into the quiet world of ferns, not as relics of the past, but as architects of Earth's renewal. After the great extinctions where fire had licked the land clean and ash had settled like a second sky, It was ferns that slipped silently into the open wounds of the earth. They did not wait for the world to be ready. They made it ready. Each spore that drifted down onto scorched soil was not just a seed of a plant. It was a promise that life could begin again. And slowly, like soft green fingers, ferns began to reweave the fabric of the forests. They built from the bottom up. They cooled the soil with their shade. They held the rain with their leaves. They softened the air. In time, moss returned, then mushrooms, then tiny bugs that found homes under their curling fronds. And as these little creatures multiplied, they fed the birds and the reptiles and the mammals that followed. The ferns didn't need to stand tall or shout to the sun. Their magic was in how they created space, not just for themselves, but for everything else that would come after. In their strange two-part life cycle, ferns embody this idea of transformation. Unlike most plants, ferns have two bodies, one that looks like the fronds we know, and another so small and delicate it's often missed. A flat, heart-shaped leaf called a game to fight. It lives close to the ground, invisible in the undergrowth, silently creating the next generation. This quiet shape, fragile, temporary, is where the future begins. It's a kind of whisper from the fern to the earth. I am here. I will wait. I will grow. This dual existence, bold fronds above, hidden hearts below, gives ferns a rare kind of resilience. They can vanish and return, they can break and regrow, and in that they mirror the story of life after extinction. Just as ecosystems are rebuilt from fragments, the fern rebuilds itself from what's left behind. It teaches us that growth isn't always forward or upward. Sometimes it is inward. Sometimes it is slow, but it is always reaching, always alive. The fossil record tells us that ferns were once titans of the plant world. Some grew taller than houses, forming vast, tangled forests in Earth's distant past. Dragonflies the size of hawks floated through them. Amphibians crept between their trunks. These ancient ferns formed the first great jungles, laying down layer after layer of green. When they died, their bodies sank into the swamps and over millions of years became coal, the black memory of their photosynthesis locked beneath our feet. The energy we burn today to light cities and drive machines once pulsed through fern leaves, catching sunlight on a warm carboniferous morning. And yet, despite their ancient power, ferns never sought to rule. As flowers evolved and spread, ferns stepped back. They let go of the crown and found other places to thrive, in canyons, under trees, beside waterfalls. They became specialists in the margins, survivors in the cracks. They did not vanish, they adapted. They changed their size, their shape, their rhythm. Some became tree-like, others shrank into the tiny wisps, but always they persisted, quietly holding on. Today, when you walk through a rainforest or a shaded glen, ferns are often the first to greet you. Their fronds sway gently as if in conversation with the wind. Their shapes feel familiar, even ancient. Some have leaves that split like feathers. Others curl like spirals of seaweed. They seem soft, but their strength lies not in their toughness. It lies in their patience, in their memory, in their ability to remain when everything else has passed. You can find ferns in volcanic fields in Iceland, growing through cracks in lava. You can find them clinging to cliffs in the Andes, kissed by clouds. You can find them in deep caves, thriving where light is a rumour. This is not coincidence. Ferns have learned to listen to the earth. They don't force it. They feel it. And in doing so, they last. Perhaps this is the lesson of ferns, that survival doesn't always belong to the biggest or the brightest. It belongs to those who know how to wait, who know how to grow quietly, who know how to return again and again, no matter how many times the fire comes. In a world where we often rush, compete, and consume, the fern offers another way, a softer one, a way that says, you don't have to be loud to shape the world, you just have to keep growing. Now we arrive at the quiet heart of the story, not the climax of conquest, but the soft stillness of survival. The ferns did not vanish, did not fade, they simply continued. Through the rise and fall of empires, through the shatter of continents, through every extinction and every rebirth, they endured. And as the world changed its clothes, swapping ice for fire, jungle for desert, mountains for floodplains, the ferns stayed close to the earth, close to water, close to the beginning. They remind us that you don't have to change the world to matter. Sometimes it's enough to be the green that returns when everything else has gone. In tropical rainforests where vines twist through fog and sunlight slips like gold down the canopy, ferns still cover the ground like a soft green skin. In alpine valleys where frost clings to stone, they nestle in crevices, defying the cold with silent grace. In cities where concrete smothers the soil, ferns peek from cracks in brick, from broken sidewalks, from old stone walls, always returning, always soft, always present. They do not resist the world, they adapt to it. Where others battle for light, ferns lean into the shade. Where others stretch tall, ferns stretch wide. Their leaves catch not just the sun, but the mist. Their roots sip not only from soil, but from the air. They have learned the art of making do, and in that they have mastered the art of staying, of waiting for the right moment, of knowing that life isn't a race, it's a rhythm, and we, too, are part of that rhythm. When we place a fern on a windowsill, when we walk past one in the forest, we are brushing up against deep time, against a life form that knew the earth before flowers, that watched the rise of birds and the fall of giants, that stood in the soot of extinction and chose again and again to grow. Ferns don't just survive, they remember. In their coiled spirals and unfolding fronds is the story of every rebirth this planet has ever known. In some cultures, ferns are seen as symbols of humility, of sincerity, of hope. Their fronds curve like open hands. Their presence is calming, quiet, still. They don't seek attention. They don't bloom in bursts or call out with colour. But if you look closely, you'll see something sacred. The memory of a planet that never gave up. The record of a world that rebuilds in green. Ferns also teach us something else, about legacy. That what lasts isn't always what shines. The flowers come and go, the great beasts rise and fall, but the fern, humble and constant, remains. It shapes ecosystems from the shadows. It heals the soil, it gives shelter. It lays the groundwork for others to thrive. And though it may never stand tallest, its roots run deep. As climate shifts once more and species vanish under human weight, we may find that it is the fern again that returns first. The disaster flora. The green that reclaims. The curl that unfolds in soot and dust. In the age of machines and glass, in the ruins of what we build too fast. The fern may still whisper, life continues. So as we close this story, imagine a forest floor just after a fire. The earth is black, the air is still, and there, in the smallest crack of stone, a spiral begins to form. A fern reaching upward, slowly unfurling like a thought, like a song, like a memory. It is not loud, it is not fast, but it is sure. It is ancient, and it is alive. The ferns never needed to take over the world with force. They took it over with time, and in that there is a lesson worth holding close, that the most powerful growth is often the most patient, that the softest presence can be the most enduring, and that in a world shaped by change, the quiet green things may be the ones that carry us forward. There was a time when the air we now breathe almost disappeared, when the oxygen that fills our lungs and fuels every cell came dangerously close to vanishing. It was not in an age of machines or factories, but in the ancient deep time when Earth was still learning how to breathe. Back then, the sky was not yet blue, the oceans were heavy with iron, and the continents were just beginning to rise from the sea like sleepy giants waking from a long dream. Life existed, yes, but it was simple, small, mostly invisible, and everything depended on a single thread of change that nearly snapped. At the heart of this story is oxygen, the invisible breath of life. We take it in without thinking. It powers our hearts, our muscles, our thoughts. Yet billions of years ago, it barely existed. The early Earth was wrapped in a thick atmosphere of methane, ammonia, and carbon dioxide. Volcanic gases choked the skies. Lightning split the clouds, and the seas boiled near vents in the ocean floor. Life, such as it was, clung to these extremes. Microbes fed off sulfur. Nothing needed oxygen. Nothing even knew it could exist. Then somewhere in a quiet corner of a shallow sea, a new kind of life stirred. It was small, just a single cell, but inside it was a spark of change. This microbe could take sunlight and water and use them to make sugar. In doing so, it released oxygen as a byproduct. It was not trying to save the world, it was just living. But that living began to fill the oceans with something entirely new. Oxygen. The microbe's name, as we now know it, is cyanobacteria. At first, the oxygen it produced didn't stay in the air. It was soaked up by the oceans, binding with iron and forming rust. For millions of years, the oceans turned red as iron oxide settled to the seafloor, forming layers we still find today. The oxygen disappeared into the water, into rocks, into everything it touched. It was a silent, invisible tide changing the world at a pace so slow it could hardly be seen. And then something strange happened. The Earth began to run out of things for the oxygen to bind to. Suddenly, the oxygen had nowhere else to go. It began to rise into the air. And in that moment, the planet changed forever. For the first time, the sky tasted breath. The Great Oxygenation Event, as scientists call it, didn't just fill the air, it transformed everything. For some life forms, oxygen was poison. Entire groups of ancient microbes suffocated and died. Extinction swept through the invisible world. But others adapted. They evolved ways to use oxygen not just to survive, but to thrive. And with that, the engines of complex life began to turn. But this balance was delicate. The oxygen levels didn't rise in a steady upward line. They fluctuated. The Earth's systems, oceans, volcanoes, forests, clouds, all pushed and pulled on that fragile breath. There were times when the oxygen nearly vanished again, times when Earth stood at the edge of suffocation. These dips came slowly, but when they did, they left silence in their wake. Mass extinctions, collapsed ecosystems, a planet holding its breath. One of the greatest dips happened long after the first oxygen rise, in a time when plants had just begun to spread across land. These plants exhaled oxygen, breathing it into the sky with every leaf. But as forests grew denser and more complex, they also locked carbon away in their roots and trunks. When these trees died and fell into swamps, they didn't fully decay. Instead, they became buried, turning into peat, then coal. The carbon was trapped, and with less carbon in the air, Earth began to cool. Glaciers spread and life struggled. In this colder, thinner air, oxygen levels dropped. Slowly at first, then drastically. Forests shrank. Insects, which had once grown to enormous sizes thanks to high oxygen, began to vanish. Amphibians gasped. Reptiles adapted by laying eggs that could survive drier, cooler air. And from this shift, from this slow choke of the atmosphere, new life began to rise. Those that survived did so by changing how they moved, how they breathed, how they lived. Oxygen, it turns out, not only feeds life, it also shapes it. The story of oxygen is not a simple one. It's a story of cycles, of breath held and breath released, of too much and too little. Every time the oxygen dipped, the world was pushed into transformation. Sometimes it ended species, sometimes it birthed entirely new ones, and always, it reminded the planet of how fragile its balance truly is. Today, when we breathe in and out, we don't think of cyanobacteria or ancient forests or the way glaciers once sculpted the sky. But all of it lives in us. Every cell we carry runs on oxygen. Every moment we are awake is powered by that ancient gas, born from sunlight and water and time, and it almost didn't happen. The breath we take is a miracle suspended in balance, a memory of a world that once came so close to never breathing again. Let us drift deeper into the breath of our planet, not just as something we inhale, but as something the Earth itself learned to give. Oxygen did not simply appear and stay. It came and went like a tide, rising, falling, and shaping everything in its path. After the first rise brought both death and possibility, life began to organize itself around this strange reactive element. It was not enough to survive in its presence. Creatures began to use it, to build it into the rhythm of their cells. The spark of oxygen began to fuel a new kind of metabolism, one that released far more energy than anything before. This energy opened the door to complexity. Single-celled organisms began to live in clusters, some of them specialized, working together, becoming more than the sum of their parts. The first eukaryotes, cells with nuclei, appeared. Inside them, ancient bacteria that once lived alone now served as energy centers, mitochondria that used oxygen like a flame inside the body. With this spark, life expanded in its possibilities. Longer lifespans, greater movement, structures that could form muscle, bone, tissue. In oxygen, the machinery of multicellular life found its engine. But this newfound breath also made life fragile. Oxygen is both gift and threat. It fuels, but it also corrodes. It allows for power, but demands balance. Too much oxygen can burn, too little, and everything slows. And so Earth's life forms evolved within a narrow window, learning to guard against its risks even as they depended on its rewards. Antioxidants appeared, molecules that caught the excess, kept the fire from spreading too far. Even today, in our own cells, these defences continue their quiet work, remembering that oxygen, like all powerful things, must be handled with care. The plants that spread across the land millions of years ago began to change the very sky. With each breath, they pulled in carbon dioxide and released oxygen, and the atmosphere began to swell with life's exhale. This time is called the Carboniferous period, a world so rich in oxygen that dragonflies grew wings as wide as a hawk's, and millipedes stretched longer than a man. Fires too were more intense, fed by the oxygen-rich air. The earth was wild with breath, and everything within it burned brighter, both literally and figuratively. But this abundance did not last. As plants died and were buried, their carbon was locked away, and oxygen levels began to drop again. The earth cooled, icy winds swept across the land, insects shrank, reptiles with more efficient lungs began to take over. The stage of life shifted, and with it, so did the breath of the world. These changes happened not in weeks or years, but in eons. A slow dialogue between life and air, written in forests, fossils, and flame. What's most extraordinary is how oxygen connects the smallest forms of life to the largest systems of the planet. The algae in the ocean, barely visible to the eye, are among the greatest oxygen producers on Earth. They float in waves, drifting with the currents, pulling in sunlight, and breathing out the future. Forests do the same, one leaf at a time, writing the atmosphere into being. Volcanoes too play a part, releasing gases that shift the chemical dance, altering how much oxygen the planet can hold. Even the rocks beneath our feet absorb and release oxygen in ways we are only just beginning to understand. Each of these systems is a thread in a much larger fabric, one that has frayed and mended itself across time. There were times, more than once, when the oxygen levels fell so low that vast numbers of species vanished. These oxygen crashes were quiet extinctions. There were no fiery impacts or thundering volcanoes, just a slow suffocation, a thinning of the breath. And yet, life always responded. Some creatures adapted by growing more efficient lungs, others changed their blood. Some went deeper into the oceans where oxygen was still more stable. Life didn't give up, it adjusted its rhythm to the fading breath. Even now we can read these shifts in ancient ice. In bubbles trapped deep beneath Antarctica, we find echoes of Earth's changing air. In layers of sediment at the bottom of the lakes, we see the fingerprints of dying blooms, rising plankton, and the whispers of oxygen that once held the world together. The story is written everywhere, not in words but in breath. And yet, for all its summons, oxygen is the loudest storyteller of Earth's history. It tells of life's courage, of its fragility, of its capacity to begin again after almost every end. It has shaped the curve of every leaf, the stretch of every wing, the size of every heart. It is not just in the air, it is in the very design of life. So the day the oxygen nearly died is not just one day, it is many days stretched across time when the earth teetered on the edge of silence. But from each of those edges, life stepped back. It learned new ways to breathe, and in doing so it carried forward the great experiment of living, one breath at a time. Now let us breathe slowly into the final folds of this story, not as an ending, but as an understanding. The air that surrounds us, invisible and taken for granted, is not a given. It is an achievement, a collaboration between water and light, between stone and cell, between time and transformation. Every breath we take is a continuation of an ancient negotiation, begun long before us and continuing still. The oxygen that enters our lungs is older than memory, older than language. It is a gift passed down by microbes, by forests, by ocean plankton that shimmer just beneath the surface. It is not just air, it is inheritance. When we sleep, when we dream, when we whisper to someone in the dark, all of it rides on oxygen. And it is not alone in the sky. It dances with nitrogen, with carbon, with traces of things too small to name. But oxygen is the one we need, the one we burn, the one we shape ourselves around. And for something so necessary, it is remarkably delicate. A shift of a few percentage points, and the world as we know it begins to stutter. A little less, and fires do not light. A little more, and every flame burns out of control. Life was built on that balance, cell by cell, breath by breath. In times long gone, there were moments when the balance wobbled, when the sky grew heavy with carbon or too lean with air. Sometimes this was from great shifts, continents colliding, volcanoes waking, oceans overturning. Sometimes it came slowly, a million leaves falling into swamps, storing carbon that would never return. In each of these times, life was tested. And always, it found a way through, but never without change, never without loss, never without learning. Even now, Earth whispers the story of oxygen through rusting rocks, through the bubbles in glacial ice, through the slow breath of soil after rain. These signs tell us the planet remembers, that it listens to its own breath, and now, so must we. In the modern age, the balance once held by ancient forests and algae is shifting again, this time not from nature, but from us. We burn the coal made from ferns long buried. We release carbon faster than the planet can absorb. We cut the forest that once fed the sky with breath, and as we do, the air changes, not in a storm but in a whisper. Oxygen levels are not crashing, not yet, but the systems that support them are strained. The oceans warm, plankton struggle. The forests, once steady, now flicker with fire and fall to blade. And in this, the lesson of the past comes forward. The breath of the world is not infinite. It must be made, maintained, protected. If it falters, life will not end instantly. But it will change. Some forms will vanish, others may rise. But it is not guaranteed that we will be among them. Still, there is time. Just as ancient life turned sunlight into air, we can turn knowledge into care. We can plant, protect, restore. We can listen, breathe, and choose. The story of oxygen is not finished. It has many more chapters, and we are now part of the writing. Whether we remember the near silences of the past or forget them, will shape what comes next. In classrooms and laboratories, children and scientists alike study photosynthesis, the simple process that powers the world. But it is not simple. It is sacred. It is the way stars become breath, the way light becomes life. And from that miracle, everything we know has grown. So the day the oxygen nearly died was not the end. It was a turning, a moment when the earth held its breath and then chose to exhale again. A moment repeated in quiet cycles, over and over, across billions of years. And today, as we stand under a sky rich with air, we are part of that breath, part of that choice, part of the long green thread that began with a single cell in a shallow sea, and now winds through forests, oceans, and hearts. We live inside that breath. We are shaped by it. And if we honour it, if we protect what gives it, we will carry forward a gift older than bones, older than wings, older than words. A gift as soft as a breeze, as powerful as fire, as vital as hope. The gift of breath, fragile, ancient, and still unfolding. Long before humans stood upright or held tools, before whales sang or lions roared, mammals were small and quiet things. They crept through the underbrush beneath towering dinosaurs, hid beneath roots and rocks, and waited. For millions of years they did not rule the world. They survived in its corners. They lived in the hush between footsteps, in the warmth of burrows, in the hollow places where giants did not tread. This is the story of waiting, of how mammals, soft and unnoticed, held on to life while the world belonged to others. The earth during the age of dinosaurs was loud and powerful. Massive creatures roamed forests and plains, their scales catching the sunlight, their footsteps echoing across valleys. The plants grew tall to escape the grazing mouths of sauropods. The skies were filled with sharp wings and hunting eyes. In this world, the mammals were barely a whisper. Most were no bigger than mice. They came out at night, when the world cooled and the danger slept. Their eyes adapted to darkness. Their ears grew sharp. Their bodies became warm from within. These early mammals learned to listen before they moved, to feel before they reached, to wait. They waited not for a chance to rule, but for a chance to continue. They ate insects and seeds. They raised their young in secret places. Some gave birth to live young, protecting them from the dangers outside. Others laid tiny eggs and curled around them. Their survival was not about dominance. It was about care, quietness, and patience. And in those small lives, something extraordinary was beginning to stir. Intelligence, emotion, memory. Their brains grew more complex. They began to dream. The fossil record shows them scattered through time like soft footprints. A jawbone here, a tooth there, evidence that they were there all along, watching the world unfold from the edges. While the dinosaurs ruled, mammals were shaping a different future, one built not on size or strength but on adaptability. They could live in trees, in burrows, in tunnels and cracks. They didn't need the open plains. They didn't seek the sun. Their world was smaller but safer. It allowed for evolution to whisper slowly, to try new things in silence. When the meteor struck and the age of dinosaurs came to its fiery end, the world fell into shadow. The forests burned. The air darkened. Food chains broke. And in that silence, in that deep dark pause, the mammals emerged. Not in triumph, but in continuation. They had always been there, in the background, waiting. Now, with the giants gone, they stepped into the open. The world was no longer thunder and scale. It was quiet, soft, rebuilding. And mammals, already masters of survival in silence, began to shape it. They didn't take over all at once. For a time, the earth was still raw, the climate shifted, the forests regrew, but mammals were ready. They spread quickly, exploring the world their ancestors had once hidden from. Some stayed small, others grew, some climbed, some dug, some swam. And in their bones, the waiting had left a gift, warmth. Mammals had learned to keep their bodies warm from the inside, no matter the weather. This let them move through cold nights, through shifting seasons, through the uncertainties of a world still healing. Warmth became more than a survival trait. It became a way to live. Mammals could be active when others slept. They could raise young in colder places. They didn't need the sun. They carried their own fire. This warmth also reached their minds. Mammals began to care in ways few others did. They nurtured their young. They taught, remembered, and protected. They formed bonds that lasted beyond survival. And in those bonds, the roots of emotion began to grow. This emotional depth became another quiet strength. It allowed for cooperation, for families, for communities, for the beginnings of empathy. And though these mammals still faced danger, from predators, from the elements, they no longer waited in the shadows. They moved through them, shaping the world softly, from the inside out. Even now, when we look at the mammals around us, at a sleeping fox, a nursing whale, a child curled close to its parent, we see the legacy of that waiting, the patience that shaped bodies to be warm, eyes to see in the dark, hearts to hold more than instinct. Mammals didn't rush to take the world. They learned how to survive in its quietest corners, and when the time came, they stepped forward, not loudly, but completely. In the end, the mammal's long wait was not just a pause, it was preparation, a slow, deliberate shaping of life that could bend and not break, that could hide and still grow, that could feel and still survive. They were not the rulers of the ancient world, but they became the caretakers of the new one, all because they learned how to wait in the shadows. Let's follow the warmth deeper now, into the soft, beating heart of the mammal story, not in grand events or dramatic rises, but in quiet moments that built a legacy. After the extinction of the dinosaurs, the earth was a broken canvas. Fires had scorched the land and the skies were heavy with ash. But from this emptiness came opportunity. The mammals that had once waited in burrows and crevices now stepped into the spaces left behind. Their world was no longer one of hiding, but experimenting and beginning again. And so they did, slowly, carefully, gently. With each generation, mammals stretched into new shapes. Some became fast runners on open plains. Others learned to leap from tree to tree. Some returned to the water, reshaping themselves into sleek swimmers. This was not conquest, but quiet expansion. Evolution worked with what had waited. Sharp ears, warm blood, soft fur, nimble paws. These tools, shaped in the shadows, were now used in the light. The earth didn't crown mammals as rulers. It gave them a chance to adapt, and they did. Among the most profound shifts was the rise of care. While many creatures lay eggs and moved on, mammals stayed. They nurtured. They fed their young with milk, a gift from their own bodies. They protected and taught. And in this slow attention, something powerful formed. A sense of continuity, of emotional memory. A parent passed knowledge to offspring not through instinct alone, but through interaction. A look, a sound, a gesture. Mammals began to communicate in ways more subtle and layered than ever before. In this growing emotional world, brains began to change. They became larger, more complex. Not just to hunt or flee, but to understand, to remember, to bond. Some mammals began to play, not for food or defense, but for joy, for learning, for connection. Others developed calls and songs to find each other in the forest or across the sea. Intelligence crept forward in quiet steps, not with fireworks but with whispers. A mother comforting her young, a wolf working with its pack, a primate solving a puzzle in silence. While reptiles had relied on scales and sun, mammals relied on warmth and adaptability. They learned to survive the cold by growing thicker fur. They tunneled to escape heat. They used tools, not always of stone but of strategy, new ways to nest, to forage, to thrive. With every challenge, mammals asked a different question than the world had heard before. Not just how do I survive, but how can I change? And in that question was freedom. The continents continued to drift. Mountains rose, oceans widened, forests spread and shrank. Through it all, mammals moved with the world, not against it. In South America, strange mammals with armor plates wandered the plains. In Australia, marsupials raised their young in pouches. In Africa, the ancestors of elephants stomped slowly across dry grasslands. Each environment sculpted a new kind of mammal, and each mammal shaped its environment in return. In this gentle co-creation, life became richer. Food webs grew more layered, ecosystems became more dynamic, and through it all, mammals remained sensitive to temperature, to sound, to each other. Their nervous systems were tuned not only to survive, but to feel. Pain, yes, but also comfort. Fear, but also safety. Mammals didn't just react, they responded. This gave them flexibility, the ability to pause, to choose, to wait, a trait that would one day support empathy, planning, and even imagination. Yet even as mammals grew and spread, they never lost their quiet ways. The majority remained small, nocturnal, cautious. For millions of years they stayed out of the spotlight. The world belonged once more to great reptiles, not dinosaurs now, but birds and cold-blooded creatures of water and land. Mammals kept to the edges, letting their intelligence and emotional depth develop in peace. Then once again the earth shifted. Climates cooled, forests turned to grasslands, large reptiles waned. Mammals that had once waited in burrows now stood upright on two legs, gazing across wide horizons. They began to shape not just tools, but fire, not just shelters, but stories. And from that long, shadowed history of waiting and feeling, something new was ready to emerge. Something that would think about time, question the stars, and name itself human. But long before that step, the mammals had already won something deeper than dominance. They had built a way of life grounded in warmth, memory, and care. They had turned survival into community, motion into meaning. They had waited in the shadows, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. And when the time came to rise, they did so gently, carrying with them the lessons of darkness, the softness of fur, the quiet rhythm of a heart that never stopped listening. Now, let us walk alongside those mammals as they continue their quiet ascent, not in leaps of dominance, but in careful steps woven through time. The waiting that shaped them didn't end when the dinosaurs fell, it became a part of who they were. Even as some mammals grew large and powerful, many remained small and alert, their senses honed by eons of listening. It was this attentiveness that allowed them to read the land, to find food where others couldn't, to raise young in places of safety and silence. This sensitivity, born in the shadows, became their strength in the light. As new environments emerged, grasslands stretching wide under open skies, forests shifting with every climate change, deserts whispering across old seabeds, mammals responded with flexibility. Some evolved to run faster, their limbs lengthening and lungs expanding. Others became burrowers or gliders or swimmers. Their bodies shifted not by force but by quiet need. This adaptability didn't come from ambition, it came from listening to the world. Mammals became masters not of control but of response. And in the heart of this evolution was something profoundly soft: connection. Mammals didn't just live alongside each other, they lived with each other. Herds formed, packs hunted together, parents nurtured, mates bonded. Some groups began to recognize each other's voices, even each other's moods. These were not instincts alone, they were beginnings of awareness, of relationship, of emotion moving through the body not just as a flex, but as recognition. From this depth came behaviors the world had never seen before. Dolphins playing in waves, not for food or safety, but for the joy of movement. Elephants mourning their dead, standing silently beside fallen companions. Wolves howling not just to call, but to keep their pack in harmony. Even the simplest mammal, in the curve of a tail around its sleeping young, carried something sacred, the memory of protection, passed down not in genes alone, but in behavior, in tenderness. This tenderness, quiet and often invisible, rewrote what survival could mean. It meant more than teeth and speed. It meant feeling. It meant staying close. It meant remembering who mattered. And as brains grew and hands became more capable, some mammals began to shape not just their families or shelters, but the environment itself. Beavers built dams, primates crafted tools, whales echoed through oceans, their songs stretching for miles, perhaps to find one another, or perhaps just to share something deeper, presence. In one lineage of primates, something stirred that would one day become language. A sound became a symbol, a gesture, a meaning. This was not sudden. It was slow, fragile, shaped over generations. The mammals that had once waited in burrows now sat in trees, watching the stars, learning to plan. They gathered, shared food, protected the old and the young. They began to wonder, not in words yet, but in attention, in awe. And eventually some of them stood upright. They looked out across vast landscapes. They carved tools from stone, drew shapes on cave walls, built fires to keep the cold away. These were not different creatures, they were mammals still warm, still soft, still shaped by the long history of waiting and surviving. Their minds carried echoes of every burrow, every whisper in the night, every gentle curl of a parent around a newborn. The humans who would one day speak, build, write, dream, they did not appear by accident. They rose from the patience of the mammals who waited in the shadows. Even today within us the waiting lives on, in our instinct to care, in the way we hold those we love, in the way our hearts quicken when we hear footsteps in the dark. We are not just creatures of reason or thought. We are animals that remember, not with facts, but with feeling. Our warmth, our sleep, our fear, our comfort, all of it was shaped long before we knew what names to give it. So when we think of evolution, of life's long story, let us remember that not all strength is loud, that not all survival is seen. The mammals taught us this, by listening, by feeling, by holding on when the world seemed too large, too dangerous, too full of giants. They waited, not because they were weak, but because they knew that life does not always rush forward. Sometimes it curls inward, sometimes it grows slowly, sometimes it waits in the dark, not afraid but ready. And when the time comes, it steps out into the light, not to conquer, but to continue, with warmth, with memory, with the softness of a creature who has learned that the quietest survival can shape the strongest future. Beneath the ocean's surface, where light softens and colours blur into blue, lie vast living cities made of stone and softness. Coral reefs stretch quietly across the seafloor, formed not by giants or storms, but by tiny animals building endlessly with patience and care. They are ancient, older than flowers, older than birds. Some reefs have been growing for thousands of years, layer upon layer, as if time itself leaves its fingerprints in calcium and curve. They are not loud, they do not move, but in their silence they hold the memory of endings and the secret of life's persistence. Each coral is a colony of small soft creatures called polyps. With gentle arms they reach into the water to feed, and with each meal they leave behind a trace, a tiny ring of limestone hardened from the minerals around them. Over time, these traces stack up, forming shapes that look like brains, fans, branches, or forests turned to stone. But within those stone shapes, life pulses. The The coral breathes, feeds, grows, and perhaps most importantly, it remembers. The earth has warmed and cooled many times. Seas have risen and fallen. Mass extinctions have swept the oceans more than once, wiping out creatures we will never know. And each time in the silence that followed, corals found a way to return. Not all survived, many vanished. But some endured, shrinking into smaller forms, retreating into deeper waters, holding on until the sea was ready again. These survivors are not just animals. They are storytellers in silence, their bodies shaped by endings we cannot see. Corals depend on a partnership, one of the oldest and most delicate in the natural world. Inside each coral lives a tiny algae called zooxanthella. The coral gives the algae a home, the algae in turn uses sunlight to make food and shares it. This friendship fuels the reef. It paints the coral in bright colours. It allows entire ecosystems to flourish, fish, crustaceans, anemones, even sharks. But this bond is fragile. When the ocean becomes too hot, the algae leaves, and without it, the coral begins to starve. It turns pale, then white in a process called bleaching. If the heat remains, the coral dies. This is not new. The fossil record shows that corals have bleached and vanished before. During Earth's past warmings, entire reef systems collapsed. The Great Dying 252 million years ago wiped out over 90% of marine species, and yet after the silence, corals returned. They grew again, they rebuilt the cities of the sea, they learned to host new kinds of algae, to adapt to different light, to anchor themselves in changing currents. In this, they did not forget the past, they reshaped themselves around it. What makes coral extraordinary is not their strength, but their slowness. They grow millimetre by millimetre, year by year. A single reef may take centuries to form, but in that time it becomes a world. It offers shelter, food and place. It becomes a nursery, a fortress, a marketplace. Every curve and crevice is home to something, and all of it is made by creatures so small they can barely be seen. It is as if life, given enough time, can build monuments not out of steel but out of memory. Divers who swim through ancient reefs describe the feeling as otherworldly, like floating through a dream made of colour and quiet motion. Fish move like paint across canvas. The light dances through the water, flickering across coral spines. There is no sound but breath. And yet the reef is alive with signals, chemical, visual, electric. Creatures communicate through motion and light, using the reef as a stage for survival. But even as we admire this beauty, we must recognise the weight it carries. These reefs are not just decoration. They are barometers of the planet's health. When oceans warm, when acidity rises, when pollution spreads, the corals respond first. They warn us. Their bleaching is not just a sign of their own suffering. It is a whisper from the sea itself. Something is changing. And if we do not listen, the silence that follows may not be temporary. Still, there is hope in the coral's memory, in their ability to return after collapse, in their quiet resilience. Some scientists are working to help them adapt faster, transplanting heat-tolerant species, restoring broken reefs. Others are simply listening, studying the rhythms of coral spawning, the way they speak to each other through the water. Every effort is a recognition of what the coral already knows, that life, even in the ocean's slowest corners, is always ready to begin again. In the end, the coral does not rage or cry. It builds, quietly, continuously. It remembers the heat, the collapse, the silence. And then, slowly, it begins again, one ring at a time. Let's descend now into the deeper stories held within the coral. Not the ones etched in stone, but the ones whispered through water. Corals, in their stillness, carry the memory of oceans long forgotten. Beneath their calm surfaces, they remember when continents were arranged differently, when sea levels were higher or lower, when entire species swam past that no longer exist. They've stood through volcanic upheaval, under shifting climates and within ancient tides. And through it all, they have quietly documented the world layer by layer, ring by delicate ring. Like trees of the sea, they carry time in their bones. Each polyp that builds the reef is small, almost invisible, but together they form communities that stretch for miles. They share nutrients. They sense changes in current and light. When conditions are right, entire colonies spawn together, releasing clouds of eggs and sperm into the moonlit water. These synchronized events happen not with sound, but with rhythm, an ancient pulse tied to the lunar cycle, to water temperature, to something deeper than thought. It is not just reproduction, it is ritual, a reminder that even the smallest beings are woven into vast celestial patterns. But these rituals now face disruption. As the ocean warms and acidifies, corals struggle to hear the old signals. The temperature cues that once guided spawning come earlier, or not at all. The waters carry more carbon dioxide than before, making it harder for corals to form their stony skeletons. Like ghosts of themselves, they fade. And yet even in this fading, corals adapt. Some are learning to live with different algae. Some are shifting their spawning cycles. Some are forming in deeper, cooler waters. These are not fast changes, but coral has never rushed. It endures by adjusting slowly, patiently, layer by layer. In some places, scientists are aiding this adjustment. In the waters of the Great Barrier Reef and other threatened sites, restoration divers plant baby corals grown in nurseries. These young fragments are chosen for resilience, those that survive heat better or grow faster. Like gardeners of the sea, the divers work in silence, gently attaching coral pieces to damaged reefs with underwater glue or biodegradable anchors. It's delicate work and slow, but it mirrors the coral's own method, building quietly, piece by piece, never giving up. These restoration efforts are small compared to the scale of the ocean's challenges, but they matter, not just for the reefs, but for the millions of lives they support. Coral reefs shelter a quarter of all marine life, despite covering less than 1% of the ocean floor. They provide food, protection, and livelihoods for countless coastal communities. They buffer shores from storms, filtering waves through their stone branches. Their loss would echo far beyond the ocean. And yet, we must be honest, many reefs are in peril. Bleaching events are growing more frequent. Some reefs have lost most of their coral cover. The colour drains, the fish vanish, the silence returns. But corals have come back from silence before, after the Great Dying, after ice ages, after mass extinctions. Their survival is not just about strength, it's about memory, a kind of cellular remembering of how to rebuild. There are reefs still thriving, tucked away in cooler waters, or in places where currents provide relief. These strongholds may carry the seeds of future reefs. They are like libraries of resilience, each coral storing the knowledge of how to survive a changing world. Scientists study them, hoping to understand what makes them endure. And in these studies, a pattern emerges. The healthiest reefs are those given space to rest, to grow undisturbed, to do what they've always done, build life from stillness. Corals also teach us something about cooperation. Each reef is a mosaic of species, not just corals, but sponges, algae, crabs, eels, fish, all living together. No one species dominates. Balance keeps the reef alive. If one thread frays, the whole web trembles. This delicate interdependence is not a weakness. It's a strength, a reminder that survival often comes not from competition, but from connection, from the willingness to coexist. When we snorkel or dive among the corals, what we witness is not just beauty, it's community. A million silent voices working together to make something enduring. The bright fish darting between branches, the shrimp cleaning parasites from a passing wrasse, the sea turtle resting on a coral ledge. Each part is necessary. Each plays a role, and the coral at the heart of it all keeps growing, remembering, rebuilding. In every reef there is an echo of the past and the possibility of the future, a message written not in words but in stone and colour. Life continues, not always in the same form, not always without loss, but it continues. And so the coral, gentle architect of the ocean's edge, keeps its silent rhythm, waiting, adjusting, hoping, teaching us without a sound how to survive change not with fear, but with grace. Now let us drift slowly to the closing waters of this story, where the coral reef fades not into silence but into something deeper, understanding. The coral, in all its stillness, is not passive. It is ancient motion, a process that repeats itself every night, every tide, every century. While we rush above, hurrying through hours and years, the coral counts time in minerals and moonlight. It listens not for sound but for current. It moves not with limbs but with purpose. And in this quiet way, it survives not by force but by memory, the memory of a planet that has ended many times and always begun again. As the world warms once more, as we look toward oceans increasingly threatened, it becomes clear that coral is not just a victim. It is a guide. It shows us how to live through loss, not by erasing it, not by denying it, but by growing around it. Bleaching is not death, not at first. It is grief made visible, a cry for relief, a pause, and if the waters cool, if the balance returns, the coral may welcome back its algae, its colour, its breath. It may begin again, scarred but living. This too is a kind of resilience. There are reefs that have been wiped clean, turned white as bone, and yet after a season or a year, colour begins to creep back. A tiny polyp anchors to stone, a fish returns, a thread is retied. These recoveries do not make headlines, but they are happening, slowly, stubbornly. Life refuses to give up. The reef remembers how to rebuild. In this way, coral speaks to something universal. All across the planet, life faces pressures it has never known before. Heat waves, acid rains, rising seas. But the reef shows that beginnings are not made of hope alone. They are made of small acts, repeated endlessly. A tiny polyp, a gentle current, a diver's hand planting a fragment. A moment of rest for a battered reef. This is how healing begins. Not in noise, but in care. Not in reaction, but in rhythm. And the coral teaches another truth. That beauty is not just decoration, it is function. The colours of a reef are not just for show, they are signals, shields, food, identity. Every swirl of pink, every flare of blue, every pulse of light is part of a system more intricate than any machine. It's a system built from cooperation, between animal and algae, between predator and prey, between shadow and light. When we lose that beauty, we do not just lose something lovely, we lose a language, a way the world speaks to itself. So we must ask ourselves, are we still listening? Are we watching the reefs not just with awe, but with attention? Do we see the pale coral not just as a problem, but as a plea? The reef is not gone, not yet, and while it remembers how to return, it cannot do so alone. It needs cleaner waters, it needs protected coasts, it needs time, it needs us, not to dominate, but to join in the care, to become part of the patient rebuilding. And in return, the reef offers more than beauty. It offers lessons in humility, in balance, in building slowly but surely. It reminds us that the world is not held together by the loudest voice or the strongest hand, but by tiny lives working together in silence, by cycles respected, by limits honoured. The coral knows what we sometimes forget, that endurance does not come from resisting change, but from flowing with it, adjusting to it, becoming something new without losing the core of who you are. So when we stand on a shore and look out at the horizon, or dive into warm water and glimpse the glow of a reef, we are not just seeing a place, we are seeing memory. A place that has endured 5 mass extinctions and still breathes. A world within a world, a song sung without words, and as long as it lives, even in fragments, it reminds us of what is possible, not just for coral, but for everything. The coral does not promise immortality, but it shows that survival can be graceful, that rebuilding can be beautiful, that even after devastation, life can continue, not unchanged, but undeterred. And so it grows, one polyp at a time, one breath at a time, one dream of colour in a world that sometimes forgets to listen. It is there still, deep below the surface, waiting, remembering the end, and choosing again and again to begin. There was a time when the earth nearly froze to death, the oceans turned to glass. Glaciers crawled across continents like sleeping giants rolling over the land. From pole to pole, the planet was wrapped in ice. Even the equator, usually warm and bright, sat beneath snow. This was no ordinary winter. It lasted for millions of years. And yet from that deep and dangerous cold, life did not vanish. It changed. It learned. And what emerged after the freeze would shape everything that followed, and including us. This moment in Earth's history is called Snowball Earth. It happened more than 600 million years ago, long before dinosaurs, before forests, even before complex animals had found their way into the seas. At the time, most life was microscopic. Simple cells floated in the oceans, soaking in sunlight, exchanging gases, dividing slowly. The continents were barren, lifeless rock. The air was thin, and the sky often pink or orange from strange ancient gases. Then, for reasons still studied, the climate shifted. The cold came and it stayed. Glaciers formed and spread, reflecting sunlight away from the planet. With less heat, more ice formed. It became a feedback loop. The colder it got, the more ice appeared. The more ice appeared, the colder it got. Eventually the oceans began to freeze, not just at the surface, but in thick slabs of ice that reached deep below. Volcanoes still rumbled beneath, but their heat couldn't keep up. Almost every part of the earth became silent and white. This silence was dangerous. Photosynthesis slowed as light could no longer reach the water. Life began to starve. With the oceans sealed and the air dry, ecosystems collapsed before they could even grow. But not all life disappeared. Some microbes found refuge beneath the ice, near underwater vents where heat still escaped. Others clung to survival in brine pockets, tiny salt-rich spaces where liquid water persisted. These hidden places became cradles of endurance. What's remarkable is not just that life survived, but how it used the cold to evolve. In the stillness, cells began to develop new tools. They learned to group together, to form colonies. Some cells began to specialize, one for movement, another for feeding, another for protection. It was here in the belly of a frozen planet that the earliest ancestors of animals began to emerge. The crisis didn't just pressure life to survive, it pressured it to cooperate, and in doing so life became more complex. Scientists believe that Snowball Earth may have been the spark that triggered the Cambrian explosion, the period shortly after the ice receded, when life exploded into variety and complexity. Multicellular organisms, body plans, eyes, shells, all appeared in a geological instant. It's as if life had been holding its breath beneath the ice, dreaming of new shapes, and finally exhaled in a burst of creativity once the warmth returned. But the thaw did not come easily. It was volcanoes that saved the world. For millions of years they had continued to release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. With nowhere to go, that carbon built up. Eventually it thickened the air just enough to trap more heat. The ice began to melt, oceans flowed again, and the atmosphere filled with the breath of life. What followed was not just a warming, it was a transformation. Rain fell on continents that had not felt water in eons. Rivers carved through rock. Nutrients washed into the sea, feeding blooms of algae that shimmered in colour. The oceans, once dark and silent, lit up with movement. And in this new world, the early animals swam. Some crawled, some filtered water, some hunted, but all of them carried the memory of ice, in their cells, in their strategies, in their resilience. Snowball Earth left more than scars. It left lessons. That pressure can create possibility. That stillness can nurture change. That even a frozen world can be a womb. The cold did not kill life. It shaped it. It slowed everything down and in doing so allowed complexity to form. Even now in the genes of every creature, including us, there are echoes of that ancient winter. Proteins that protect against cold, cells that respond to stress, habits of cooperation. All of it may trace back to those long, dark years beneath the snow. In our very ability to adapt, to survive extremes, to learn under pressure, we are shaped by the cold. And so, when we speak of the Snowball Earth, we are not speaking of a tragedy. We are speaking of a crucible, a time when life was tested, and answered not with retreat, but with invention. A time when the planet wrapped itself in ice, and life, instead of fading, began to imagine something new. Let us sink further into the long winter, into the deep quiet where life continued to breathe under the weight of ice. During Snowball Earth, sunlight could not reach the seas as it once did. Yet beneath the ice, in caves of brine and cracks warmed by geothermal vents, microbes clung. To life. These were not grand creatures, not animals with limbs or eyes, but simple cells, ancient, patient, and quietly evolving. In these hidden places the world was still alive, though it moved slowly. And sometimes, in moving slowly, life has the time to change in ways it cannot under the pressure of light and speed. These isolated communities of microbes became laboratories of innovation. Cut off from the broader ocean, they formed tight networks, exchanging genes, sharing resources, refining their chemistry. Some developed stronger cell walls, others grew more efficient at harvesting energy. Most importantly, some began to live not alone but together, clustering into groups where each cell performed a role. One might handle food, another defense. In these icy shadows, the first whispers of multicellularity took shape. The idea that life could be a community, not just a single spark. Outside these pockets of survival, the Earth was locked in silence. Glaciers ground mountains to dust. Wind swept fine particles across frozen plains. Snow layered on snow, pressing into ice sheets that stretched for thousands of kilometers. But even as the surface froze, the deep Earth did not stop. Volcanoes continued to breathe, their carbon dioxide rising into the sky. For millions of years, this carbon had little effect, and the cold reflected sunlight too well. But over time, the atmosphere thickened. Heat began to gather. Slowly, like breath warming frost on glass, the planet began to stir. And in the oceans, the survivors waited. When the ice began to melt, it did not simply drip. It collapsed. In great thunderous events, sheets of ice broke apart. Oceans rushed back into movement. Sunlight touched waters long kept in shadow, and suddenly, nutrients trapped for eons were released. Iron, phosphorus, carbon, all of it flowed into the seas. Life, which had clung to the edges, now rushed forward. Microbes bloomed in vast numbers. Algae turned the waters green. The first great plankton blooms began, not just a return but a reinvention. With these blooms came oxygen, poured into the atmosphere by tiny photosynthetic cells. The air thickened with breath. The oceans became rich with food. In this feast, complexity found a foothold. The organisms that had begun experimenting with multicellularity now had room to grow. More energy, more stability, more interaction. What began in ice now swam in open water, shaped by light, stirred by current, driven by the memory of cold. This transition was not just biological, it was geological. The melting of the snowball Earth changed the shape of continents, the chemistry of oceans, the tilt of climate. Rocks, once hidden beneath glaciers, were exposed to wind and water, weathering down and feeding the sea. The atmosphere warmed further. Earth entered a new age, warmer, wetter, and more hospitable to the dreams of life. It was during this new age, the Ediacaran period, that the first large and strange life forms appeared. These were not fish or worms or plants. They were soft-bodied organisms shaped like discs, fronds, or quilted mats. Their fossils are rare and mysterious. We do not know how most of them lived or moved, but we know they were different, large enough to be seen, complex enough to wonder. These were the first visible dreams of a planet that had once been covered in snow. The Ediacaran biota, as scientists call them, may not have survived into our present world, but they paved the way for what came next. They experimented with form. They explored what life could be in a new, warmer, more generous Earth. And their success laid the foundation for the Cambrian explosion, when life burst into diversity with shells, limbs, eyes, and motion. It is easy to see this burst as sudden, a miracle of biology, but it was built on deep time, on patience, on the silent growth that happened beneath glaciers, on the cooperation forged in brine, on the slow warming of an Earth that had nearly gone still. Without the cold, there would have been no pressure to evolve. Without the freeze, no pause to reset the conditions of life. Without the silence, perhaps no song. Today, the memory of Snowball Earth lingers, in the resilience of organisms that survive in ice, in the deep-sea vents where strange life still thrives, in the cryoprotectant proteins in Arctic fish, and the slow metabolic shifts in hibernating mammals. Even in us, in how we adapt, in how we survive hardship by changing rather than resisting, the ice lives on. And so, as we reflect on this ancient winter, we must remember it not as a disaster, but as a sculptor. It shaped the ocean's future, carved pathways for complexity, and gave life the space to reimagine itself. The snowball did not kill the world. It challenged it, and in that challenge, something beautiful began to grow. Now let us rise gently from the depths of that frozen past, and into the unfolding warmth that followed, not as an escape, but as a continuation. The memory of Snowball Earth does not end with melting. It lives on in the shape of life that came next, in the way Earth remembers to rebuild after loss, in the patience of evolution. As the planet thawed, it didn't rush to bloom. It uncurled slowly, like a fern after fire, like breath returning after stillness. And what came from that thaw would change everything. The age of animals, of motion, of intent. With the ice gone, Earth became something new. Sunlight filtered through a clear sky. Water moved freely again. Mountains eroded into rivers, rivers into deltas, deltas into sea. Nutrients surged into the ocean, feeding blooms of microbes. This was more than abundance, it was opportunity. Organisms that had survived the cold now stretched into new forms, filling spaces left empty for millions of years. They tried new shapes, flat, soft, long, coiled. Some began to move, to sense, to touch the world around them in ways no life had before. And in these simple touches, awareness was born. The Cambrian explosion that followed is often described as sudden, a moment when complexity flooded the earth. But in truth, it was the flowering of seeds planted in the snow. The cells that learned to cooperate beneath the ice now formed bodies. The creatures that huddled in brine now ventured into open seas. They grew spines for structure, shells for protection, eyes for light. Movement became not just survival, but exploration. Life was no longer a whisper. It began to speak in form. Worms burrowed through sediment, shaping the seafloor. Jelly-like creatures drifted in currents. Trilobites scuttled across rocks. Each of these beings was a new attempt, not perfect, but possible. And from each came others. Coral-like animals built the first reef systems. Predators emerged, sensing and reacting. Ecosystems became layered, with prey, scavenger, hunter. All of this complexity rested on the oxygen-rich waters, the nutrient-rich seas, and the cooperative spirit that had evolved during the freeze. What Snowball Earth had stripped away, it had also cleared. The ice erased what had come before, resetting the planet's chemistry, its energy flows, its boundaries. In this clearing, life could reinvent itself without the weight of old rules. And it did, not wildly, but wisely. Every new organism carried within it the story of survival, the DNA of endurance, the quiet intelligence born in darkness. This memory shaped not only their bodies, but their possibilities. Even the continents bore marks of this shift. Glaciers had carved valleys and fjords, revealing layers of rock, exposing minerals that washed into the sea and fed plankton. The landscape was not just changed, it was activated. Life spilled from the oceans onto land in the hundreds of millions of years that followed, tracing rivers, hugging coastlines, climbing upward, and when it did, it brought with it the legacy of cold, systems for coping with stress, for preserving warmth, for adapting to hardship. These systems are still in us today. Our blood, rich in iron, echoes the chemistry of ancient seas. Our ability to sleep, to pause, to heal. These are echoes of metabolic quiet shaped in winter. Our bones carry minerals from rocks once buried under ice. Our breath speaks the language of oxygen, gifted in the bloom after thaw, and our minds, capable of patience, of planning, of waiting in silence, they carry the whisper of that long ancient stillness. When we face our own moments of cold, not just winter, but uncertainty, loss, or pause, we are not doing something new. We are remembering that the world has stopped before, that life has grown slowly, quietly, and come back stronger. That pressure and silence are not the end of the story, they are the space where the next chapter takes form. Snowball Earth teaches us that life doesn't resist change. It waits for the right moment to respond. It holds on, not in panic, but in preparation. And when the warmth returns, it doesn't rebuild what was, it creates what could be. The ice did not erase possibility. It cleared the space to imagine more. So as we look at our world, a planet once frozen and now warming, we can carry that lesson. That resilience is not just about surviving, it's about listening, waiting, letting go of what no longer works, and beginning again with what remains, like the first creatures that swam in new seas, like the cells that formed the first bodies, like the earth itself shaking off the frost and breathing new air. We are not separate from that story. We are its continuation. Every heartbeat, every idea, every act of kindness, these are warmth after cold. And in each of us lives the snowball's quiet lesson, that in stillness life can learn to dream again. Before there was life, before there were stars or planets or atoms, there was nothing. Not silence, because there was no sound. Not darkness, because there was no light to hide, just absence. A blank, not even a canvas. No space, no time, no breath. And somehow from that emptiness everything came. Galaxies spun, stars ignited, planets formed, oceans stirred, and on one tiny blue dot, life opened its eyes. This is the story of how nothing becomes something, how absence is not just the opposite of existence, but the beginning of it, how everything we see, touch, feel is born from what once was not. In physics, they call it the quantum vacuum. Not a vacuum like the emptiness of a room cleared of air, but a deeper kind of nothing, the lowest possible energy state of the universe. And yet, this nothing is not truly empty. It fluctuates. It hums with potential. Tiny particles appear and vanish in pairs, borrowing existence from the void, only to return a moment later. This is not a mistake or a glitch. It is how the universe operates at its most fundamental level. Even in the purest absence, something stirs. And it was from this strange, trembling field that the universe is believed to have emerged. The Big Bang. Not an explosion in space, but the sudden birth of space itself, expanding from an infinitesimal point. From nothingness came time, space, energy, the laws of physics. Everything we know began not in a place, but in a change, a sudden unfolding of potential. It was not created in the way we build a house or grow a tree, it simply began, because the nature of nothing is not permanence, but possibility. As the universe expanded, it cooled. Particles formed, forces separated, gravity, electromagnetism, the nuclear interactions that would bind atoms together. And out of that cooling came the first stars, born in clouds of hydrogen. These stars burned for millions of years, forging heavier elements in their cores, carbon, oxygen, iron. When they died, they scattered those elements into space, seeding future stars, future planets, future life. Every atom in your body was made in a star. Every breath you take is filled with particles that were once nowhere. This is the paradox at the heart of everything, that matter rises from emptiness, that the universe is not built on things, but on the spaces between them. Even atoms, which feel solid, are mostly void. A tiny nucleus, orbited by electrons that are more probability than particle. The chair you sit on, the air you breathe, the hands you hold, they are made of distance. What we call solid is mostly space, and yet, from that space structure forms. The atoms link, the molecules build, cells emerge, replicate, organize. Life begins, and life too thrives on space, the space inside cells, between neurons, in the gaps between thought. Our brains are not constant motion. They are pulses separated by silence. Our hearts beat in rhythm, but between each beat is pause. It is the pause that makes the beat matter. Even in nature, nothingness plays its role. Seeds wait in dry soil for water. Forests clear with fire, only to regrow in richer soil. The gaps between seasons, between storms, between breaths, they are not absence. They are readiness. The earth itself was shaped by pauses. Mass extinctions gave room for new species. Climate shifts forced adaptation. The quiet, the stillness, the empty places, they became cradles of invention. In music, it is the rest that gives rhythm its meaning. In speech, it is the silence that gives words their weight. In life, it is the still moments, the nights without dreams, the pauses in conversation, the gaps between heartbeats, where change begins. We fear emptiness because it feels like loss, but in truth it is creation's first step. Nothingness also teaches humility, that we are not the center, that the universe existed for billions of years before us and will continue long after, that our place is small, our time brief, but that smallness is not insignificance, it is intimacy. To exist at all, to be made of stardust and breath and thought, is to participate in the great unfolding of what once was not. It is to carry forward the echo of a moment when the universe first whispered yes into the dark. And so the next time you feel lost or empty or quiet inside, remember, the universe began with nothing, and from that, it made everything. Let us now linger in this strange and sacred stillness, the nothing that surrounds, the quiet from which all form rises. We often search for substance, for shape, for certainty, but the deeper we look into matter, the more we find absence. Between every star, vast gulfs of dark space. Between every atom, emptiness stretching wider than the particles themselves. Even within light, which seems to race forward with clarity, there are gaps, places where photons never pass, where shadows sleep. And yet it is precisely these spaces that make the universe coherent, legible, and alive. In the language of physics, this nothingness is not void but potential, a field of probabilities constantly shifting, always ready to become. Electrons don't orbit like planets, they appear as clouds of chance, flickering in and out of what we call position. Time itself at the quantum level does not flow in a straight river but dances, sometimes uncertain, sometimes split. The deeper we dive, the more we realize that what holds the world together is not substance alone, but the invisible scaffolding of possibility. From this scaffolding, everything else grows. Galaxies spin not in the middle of substance, but at the edge of absence. Gravity pulls not just on mass, but across space itself. Stars are born in clouds so diffuse they appear empty until gravity whispers them into form. Even black holes, those densest objects in the universe, form not in chaos, but in collapse, a folding of space back into stillness. They teach us that even the most massive presence can become a kind of nothing. And yet, from their edges, their event horizons, energy escapes, information ripples, and new theories of the universe are born. Nothingness does not destroy. It defines. It gives shape to presence by being what presence is not. In sculpture, it is the negative space that brings form to the figure. In thought, it is the pause that makes the idea complete. Our universe is not a wall of matter. It is a delicate balance of sense and sound, presence and pause, being and becoming. Even the earth, so full of stone and sea, is shaped by emptiness. Caves carved from water's patient touch, valleys etched by wind, deserts that stretch not as barren wastelands, but as oceans of potential. Life begins in hollows, the curve of a womb, the shelter of a nest, the dip in soil where seeds collect. Trees grow stronger where the wind flows through them. Rivers shape land not by standing still, but by leaving space behind. Emptiness is not the enemy of life, it is its invitation. In our own bodies, the same principle holds. Our lungs function not because they are full, but because they can become empty, a space for air to enter and leave. Our minds find clarity not in constant thought, but in stillness between ideas. Emotions crest and fall, leaving us quieter, more open. And in sleep, the deepest stillness of all, our bodies heal, our memories settle, our souls rest. We do not fear this stillness. We welcome it. We need it. Throughout history, humans have tried to describe this nothing. In science, it is the vacuum. In mathematics, zero, a symbol that holds no quantity, yet makes all other numbers possible. In philosophy, it is the void, not a hole, but a hole from which all things arise. And in spirituality, it becomes silence, surrender, mystery. In every culture, there is a name for this fertile emptiness. Nirvana, Ayin, Wuji, the great silence. And always, it is treated not as absence, but as origin. In deep meditation, monks speak of reaching a place beyond thought, not sleep, not confusion, but clear and silent awareness. In music, composers leave space between notes to let the melody breathe. In art, the white of the page can speak as loudly as the ink. And in grief, we often find ourselves sitting with an emptiness that eventually becomes memory. Soft, painful, but meaningful. These are all echoes of the same truth, that from nothingness, something meaningful can grow. And perhaps that is why the universe works the way it does, because it knows that rushing forward leaves no room for becoming. That noise must yield to quiet, that birth begins in stillness. From the tiniest fluctuations in the vacuum to the vast swirling of galaxies, from the hush before a storm to the deep pause in the heart before love begins, it is nothingness that gives life its shape. We often try to fill our lives with things, achievements, noise, certainty. But the coral teaches us to grow slowly. The stars remind us that brilliance begins in collapse. And now the space between them whispers something softer still, that it is okay to stop, to be still, to not know, that the most profound things often emerge not from action, but from the spaces we leave for them to arise. Nothingness, then, is not a mistake. It is the condition for everything, the blank page, the silent sky, the pause between questions. It is not what we escape, it is what we return to again and again so we can begin anew. Now let us walk gently to the end of this quiet journey, not toward a conclusion, but toward the deeper meaning that nothingness holds for life, for time, and for us. In the great rhythm of the universe, it is never only the presence of things that matters, it is also their absence. It is the gap, the stillness, the pause that holds the shape of what follows. We live in a universe built not on constant light, but on alternating patterns, wave and particle, sound and silence, being and becoming. In these cycles, nothingness is never the end. It is the breath before the next step. We see this most clearly in the stories of life itself. Across deep time, extinction has swept the planet clean again and again. The dinosaurs vanished. The trilobites disappeared. Coral reefs collapsed. Forests fell. And yet, from these empty spaces, life always found a way back. Not by rebuilding what was, but by imagining something new. Birds from dinosaurs, mammals from shrews, flowers from ancient ferns. Emptiness did not halt life. It gave it a place to grow. We too are shaped by this rhythm. In our lives, we often fear the spaces that feel like nothing, the job lost, the friendship faded, the hope gone quiet. But it is in those very spaces that change can take root. When we lose something, we are not left with a void. We are left with a chance to rest, to reflect, to begin again. Grief, silence, rest, solitude, these are not detours. They are deep parts of the path. They are the snowfields where new roots grow unseen. Nature tells this story over and over. The forest burns, and in the ash seeds find sunlight for the first time in years. The river dries, and in its empty bed new life takes hold. Even the desert, which seems barren, blooms after rain. The emptiness is not the opposite of life. It is part of it. It holds life in waiting, like a hand cupped around a match before it's struck. And in the human spirit, this pattern holds as well. Artists speak of the blank canvas as both terrifying and thrilling. Writers stare into the white page, unsure of the first word, and yet every book begins there. Teachers pause before answering a difficult question. Parents sit in the quiet of a sleeping child's breath. These moments are not interruptions, they are invitations. They say, slow down, something is about to begin. Even death, the final stillness we all one day meet, is not purely an end. We do not know what follows it, but what we do know is that life after death continues, not just spiritually, but physically, biologically, ecologically. The body returns to the earth, its elements feed the soil, the nitrogen in our cells becomes part of a leaf, the calcium in our bones might become part of a shell. The energy we carry is not lost, it is transformed. It rejoins the nothingness it came from, and from there something else begins. The universe in this way is deeply generous. It does not waste even the space between things, it uses the quiet. It works through the pause. In meditation we learn to sit with that emptiness. In music we feel the ache of a note held too long. In love, we understand that absence can sharpen presence, that missing someone makes their return more vivid. These are not errors in the design, they are the design. And so we must learn not to fear the nothing, not to rush to fill every space, not to panic when things end, when time slows, when the future disappears from view. Those moments are not losses, they are places where life is gathering its next form. They are like winter, quiet, cold, still, but always holding the shape of spring inside them. What feels like falling is sometimes just a seed being planted. We are part of this pattern. We were born from stardust, which came from stars, which came from hydrogen, which came from a moment of pure expansion from what was once nothing. This is not just a poetic image, it is a physical truth. Your breath, your hands, your heartbeat. All of it is made from ancient quiet turned into form. And if that is true, then so is this. You are not alone in your pauses. You're not broken when you feel empty. You're simply preparing, listening, becoming. Because in the end, nothingness is not the absence of everything. It is the cradle of everything, the blank page that waits for the first word, the silence that gives music its rhythm, the darkness that makes stars visible, and the space inside you and all around you where something beautiful is always about to grow. Light does not last forever. It feels like it should, The way it pours through morning windows, dances across water, flickers in fireflies. It seems eternal, as if it cannot stop, as if it must always move forward. But light, like everything else in the universe, is shaped by time. It is born, it travels, and one day it fades. The journey of a single beam of light begins in a place beyond sight, deep within a star, where atoms collide with such force that energy is created. That energy takes form as light, but it does not burst outward instantly. First, it struggles to escape. Inside the sun, light begins its life in the heart, the core, where temperatures are so high that hydrogen atoms are pressed into helium. This fusion releases photons, tiny packets of light, but they cannot race free. They are trapped in a dense maze of plasma, bumping into other particles, changing direction billions of times. It can take a single photon over 100,000 years just to reach the surface of the sun, and yet it never gives up. It moves, it tries, it continues. When that photon finally escapes, it races outward at the speed of light, a constant, unwavering pace that nothing else can match. It takes just over 8 minutes for light from the sun to reach Earth, and in those 8 minutes, that single photon transforms a moment. It warms a leaf, it glints off a wave, it becomes part of a thought, a feeling, a breath. All life on Earth is tied to that light, not just physically, but spiritually. We are shaped by it. We grow in its rhythm. We carry it in our memories. But where does it go when it finishes that journey? Does it vanish? Dissolve? Not quite. Light continues unless something stops it. A leaf may absorb it, using it to build sugar in photosynthesis. A rock may reflect it. A mirror may bounce it forward. A black shirt may turn it into heat. But even when light is absorbed, its energy is not destroyed. It becomes something else. This is the first secret of light. It never truly dies. It transforms. In the vastness of space, some light travels untouched for billions of years. Photons from distant galaxies stretch and stretch, their waves pulled longer by the expansion of the universe. This is redshift, light slowing, softening, cooling. It tells us the story of where galaxies are going and how fast. We see ancient light with our telescopes, the glow of stars long gone, the echo of collisions, the whisper of the early universe. This light is not just beauty, it is memory, carried across time. Sometimes light meets its end at the edge of a black hole. Here, gravity becomes so strong that nothing can escape, and not even light. When a photon drifts too close, it is caught. It spirals inward, pulled by space itself, bending. It disappears from our universe, its energy folded into the black hole's mass. But even then, it leaves a trace, a shadow, a halo of radiation, a shift in the light around it. Even in being lost, it marks its passing. In our own lives, we witness light ending in softer ways. The sun sets and the colours fade from the sky. A candle flickers and dims. A fire burns low, but always the energy remains. It warms the air, it touches skin, it changes molecules. The light we see is only a brief part of its life. Most of it we never witness. The struggle through the sun's core, the journey across space, the echo in time. But every glow we glimpse is a triumph, a photon that made it. And yet not all light comes from stars. Some is made by life. Fireflies blink in twilight. Deep-sea creatures glow in blues and greens. Certain mushrooms shine faintly in the forest. This is bioluminescence, light created by chemical reactions in living things. It serves many purposes: attraction, warning, camouflage. But it also reminds us that light is not just cosmic, it is intimate, it can come from within, and like the stars, this living light also fades, but not without meaning. Inside our bodies, light plays a quieter role. Our cells respond to circadian rhythms, guided by the presence or absence of sunlight. Our moods shift with the seasons, our hormones dance to light's tune. We are wired to notice it, to follow its rise, to sleep in its absence. Even our vision depends on it. Photons strike our eyes and are converted into electrical signals. These signals become images, memories, emotions. Light becomes thought, and thought becomes story. For thousands of years, humans have worshipped the sun, painted the moon, told tales of stars. We have used light to guide ships, mark time, chase shadows, and seek knowledge. Light became language, the torch, the lamp, the signal, and as we learned to harness it, we began to create it. Fire, oil, electricity. Now we light our nights, extend our days, chase away darkness. But even in doing so, we echo what the universe already knows, that light wants to move forward. It wants to be seen. Still, even the brightest light cannot escape time. Stars age, they cool. Some expand into red giants, then collapse into white dwarfs. Others explode in supernovae, scattering elements across the galaxy. In every case, the light changes. It bursts, it fades, it continues as something new. This is the second secret of light. Its ending is also a beginning. The atoms forged in starlight become part of planets, part of life, part of us. So where does light go when it dies? It goes everywhere. Into the soil, into the sea, into the echoing dark. It becomes warmth, it becomes memory, it becomes story. A photon may vanish, but its energy writes a new line in the universe's long poem. The end of its path is not silence, it is transformation. We are made of that light, not in metaphor, but in matter. The calcium in our bones, the iron in our blood, the oxygen we breathe, all were forged in stars, carried by light, shaped by fire. And so we too will one day change. We will dim, we will fade, but nothing is lost. The light we carry will continue, in heat, in memory, in the quiet hum of the cosmos. Our light, like every light, will go on. Let us follow that fading beam farther now, into the deep places where light becomes a whisper. As it travels across space, untouched for billions of years, light does not tire. It stretches. Each wave grows longer. What began as a bright short flash becomes a red blur, a faint echo of what it once was. This isn't decay, it's transformation. The universe itself expands, and with it light unfolds. It slows not in speed, but in energy. This cosmic redshift is the signature of time's breath, a reminder that even light, for all its brilliance, dances to the rhythm of the cosmos. But some light never reaches us. Some began its journey long ago, fired from the edge of a galaxy, only to be bent and turned by the invisible hand of gravity. Massive objects, stars, galaxies, even dark matter, uncurve the fabric of space. When light passes through these warps, it changes direction. Sometimes it is magnified, other times it disappears behind curves of space we cannot yet see. This bending is called gravitational lensing. It's not a trick. It's the universe showing us that space itself is alive, bending and shaping the journey of light with every passing moment. Even the light that does arrive carries a story of loss. Our atmosphere scatters the shorter wavelengths, the blues and violets, so only certain parts of light make it through clearly. The rest is deflected, diffused, absorbed. This is why the sky is blue and sunsets are orange. It is why stars twinkle and the moon glows with softness. Every glimmer we see is the remainder of a longer journey, filtered by air, shaped by weather, distorted by distance. What reaches our eyes is never the full truth, only a beautiful fragment of a far older message. And then there is the light we cannot see, the vast ocean of invisible wavelengths, infrared, ultraviolet, radio waves, X-rays, gamma rays, all part of the same spectrum. Each carries its own kind of story. Infrared shows us warmth. Ultraviolet reveals the hidden patterns in flowers. X-rays pass through bodies, letting us glimpse bones. These forms of light speak in frequencies beyond our senses, yet they're all around us, weaving through our lives, bouncing off surfaces, carrying information, energy, memory. Our eyes see only a sliver, but light itself is limitless. In distant galaxies, light escapes black holes not directly, but through jets of energy that erupt from their edges. These beams travel across time, revealing where stars once fed the hunger of gravity. We cannot see the heart of a black hole, but we can see its outline, not by light shining from within, but by the bending and absence of light around it. This darkness is not failure, it is evidence. It tells us where the light used to be and where it could never return. Light also marks time, not just in clocks or calendars, but in the deep history of the cosmos. The oldest light we've ever seen is the cosmic microwave background, a faint glow from when the universe was just 380,000 years old. Before this moment, the universe was too hot and dense for light to travel freely. But when things cooled just enough, photons broke free and began their journey. That light is still here, wrapped around us, a soft radio whisper from the beginning of everything. It tells us that light, once freed, remembers. Closer to home, the light of Earth also fades. The glow of a forest at dusk, the last shimmer on a pond before nightfall, the reflection of moonlight on snow, all of it is temporary. Not in the sense that it disappears, but in that it continues elsewhere. A photon reflected from a mountain lake may rise into space, travel for eons, and eventually collide with a dust grain orbiting a star we've never seen. And in that tiny moment, something changes. A temperature shifts. A molecule vibrates. The light finishes its work, unseen but not unfelt. In cities, we cast our own light into the night. Street lamps, screens, headlights, neon, artificial constellations glowing long after the stars fade from view. This light too travels. Some of it is caught in clouds, some scattered into space, some absorbed into brick and skin. We don't always think of it as part of nature, but it is. It changes the behavior of animals, the rhythm of insects, the cycle of sleep in our own bodies. Even synthetic light must answer to the laws of energy. It begins somewhere, moves, fades, and becomes something else. And then there is the light inside us. Not metaphor, but real, biophysical light. Cells emit tiny bursts of photons during certain reactions. These biophotons may help with communication within the body. It's a field still being explored, but the idea is simple. Our cells may use light as part of their language. If true, then light is not just outside us, shaping what we see, it is within us, shaping what we are. This is the third secret of light. It does not need to be seen to have meaning. Light shapes everything. Whether or not it touches an eye, it pushes matter, it marks time, it writes information, it warms, it energizes, it remembers, and always it continues, stretching, scattering, bending, transforming. When we turn off a lamp, the light doesn't end. It bounces from walls, seeps into the floor, becomes warmth in the air. When the sun sets, its rays don't stop. They pass through clouds, reflect from mountains, slip around corners, even the stars we see at night. Some of them have already gone cold, their light only now arriving. Every night sky is a graveyard of light still glowing. A map of what was, a promise of what remains. So where does light go when it dies? It doesn't vanish, it spreads, it blends, it becomes part of the next moment. It leaves the star and lands on a leaf. It leaves the leaf and becomes sugar. The sugar becomes breath, and the breath becomes speech. Somewhere a photon that left a sun 1,000 years ago now sits quietly inside a human voice, telling a story to someone they love. That is what light becomes, not just heat or energy, but presence, memory, change. Let us come now to the last movement in light's long journey. Not a disappearance, but a soft return to the fabric of the universe itself. Light, even after it fades from vision, leaves behind a mark. The energy it once carried does not vanish, it warms a surface. It alters a molecule, it shifts a shadow. Every photon that has ever touched anything, a stone, a seed, a cheek, has changed what it touched. We do not see these changes, but they accumulate. They build the world. In this way, light becomes part of history, not the kind we write down, but the kind etched into the shape of things. We walk through that history every day. In the morning light through a window, you are touched by photons born in the core of the sun hundreds of thousands of years ago. That light began its life before your grandparents were born. It fought its way through the sun's layers, broke into space, travelled across 93 million miles of vacuum, and landed softly on your face. That journey is not just science, it is poetry. It is the universe reaching across time to say, here is another day. And when that light finishes its work, it does not cease. It reflects, bends, warms. It becomes part of the wind, the soil, the skin. Maybe it will rise again as heat into the atmosphere. Maybe it will escape back into space. Maybe it will be caught in a solar panel and turned into electricity that powers a hospital or a kitchen or a lamp in a child's bedroom. That single beam, born in the fire of a star, can become anything. Warmth, power, comfort, life. In this way, light is not just a traveller. It is a builder. It creates the conditions for life and then becomes part of that life. Plants capture it, using its energy to split water, to build sugars, to grow. Those sugars feed animals. The energy moves up the food chain, and somewhere in that chain, a single photon long forgotten becomes a heartbeat, a thought, a step taken towards someone you love. Light is not just what we see, it is what allows us to be, and yet light also teaches us how to let go. Every beam moves on, it cannot stay in one place, it must continue stretching farther, growing fainter, always in motion. It reminds us that nothing stays fixed, that beauty is fleeting, and yet permanent in its own way, because even after it is gone, it has changed what it touched. A sunset fades, but the memory of its colours stays inside you. A smile under a lamp, a story told in candlelight, a stargazing night, all of them shaped by a light that no longer exists, but that made those moments possible. Even the light of the stars, though vast and ancient, must come to an end. A star will exhaust its fuel, its glow will dim, it may collapse into a white dwarf, a neutron star, or a black hole, but even then its light will continue to travel. The last photons it cast will go on for eons, crossing galaxies, maybe falling upon a world we have never seen. And there, perhaps, someone will look up, see a faint glimmer, and wonder if someone once watched it too. In this way, light becomes connection, across time, across space, across lives. It links the past to the present, the stars to the soil, the moment to the memory. Even when we sit in darkness, the room is not truly empty. It is filled with the echoes of light that once was, scattered, faint but still present. The glow in a hallway after a lamp is turned off. The warmth of a sunbeam long after sunset. These are not illusions. They are the gentle reminders that light never leaves without giving something. And perhaps most quietly, most beautifully, light teaches us about presence. Not just in the way it reveals what is there, but in the way it moves without waiting. A photon does not ask if its journey will matter. It does not hesitate. It does not turn back. It simply goes, shining into whatever space it enters. That is its gift. And it is a gift we can choose to mirror, to move through the world gently, to brighten what we touch and to keep going even when we are not seen. When we wonder what happens to light when it dies, we are also asking about ourselves. What becomes of us when we are no longer visible? What remains when the brightness fades? The answer, in both cases, is the same. We become part of everything else. Our warmth becomes part of the air. Our words ripple in the minds of others. Our care becomes someone else's courage. We change the shape of the world even if no one sees it happen. And so light does not die. It arrives, it transforms, and it gives, again and again. It becomes everything, and then it becomes more. Even now, as you sit in this moment, surrounded by shadows or sunlight, you are held by light, some born in the heart of stars, some sparked by your own body, some carrying messages from places too distant to name. You are part of that light. You are shaped by it, and you are a source of it. The light that leaves you, in words, in actions, in the warmth you give, it travels, it changes things, it continues, it does not end. This is the final secret of light. It always goes on.